just gonna send it quickly.
Jonathan says, if on air is causing too many problems, we can just skip it.
Get what you asked for.
Did you send that to that thread?
Yes.
Okay.
No. Or do you want to send it to the other, as a
Calendar?
chat in the other Hangout?
Okay.
You can link to this one.
Yeah.
We're gonna figure this out eventually.
Rather hilarious.
It's weird that you can't invite people before you started. You would think that you could invite
Yeah.
everyone and then start broadcasting.
Yeah, you would think that. Just like every other Hangout.
Yeah.
David, are you there? Can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Awesome.
I'm here.
Sorry about that
No problem.
moment, but we figured it out.
You're not good at computers.
Yeah.
Anything with a graphical user interface is not
What's the API?
So you told the people in the other hangout? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I can do video if needed, but I'm really sweaty, so I'm not.
That's okay.
Not a problem.
Everyone's switching over right
Leaving
now.
it now, so until everybody
Yep.
that has to be recorded.
Hey guys.
Hi
Hello.
there.
So everyone should be leaving the other one right now and coming back in here.
Great. So it's already recording, because apparently there's no way to invite people before starting the recording. But once everybody gets here, we should be good to go.
Where's the microphone there at OSRF?
It's on the camera, which is a little far away. You having trouble hearing us?
Yeah, the acoustics are a little.
Oh, one second. Let me try to change the settings on my computer before we move it, because otherwise we lose.
Test.
It's a little better.
Getting pretty good.
That's how now.
Oh, wait, that's the wrong one. Test. That one's also got pretty good response.
Yeah. It's,
Test. Can you hear us okay? No? Anyone?
John, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you guys now.
Okay.
And I can definitely hear you, but better Tully.
I guess that projects better.
I can hear you better, except when people move their chairs around.
I'm back on mute. Sorry.
In general, we should probably try to self-mute when you're not saying anything, because we've got a bunch of people on the line.
Do they have like a push to talk function? That would be really nice.
Well, not proper one.
Ah,
You got the mute button at the top of the screen.
Yeah.
So you have to push it once and twice.
they had that Food Watch YouTube videos.
Let's see here.
Push this out.
Are you loading up the agenda, William?
I am trying to. Is it attached to the thing? No, it's not. Where is it? There. Ugly.
Should we put that on screen share?
We can do that.
Yeah.
Me. So I'm just in the window though.
Afternoon.
All right. Sorry about that. All right. He's running the ship dig.
Jonathan. Is he there?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Awesome.
All right. So I noticed some stuff changed pretty recently here. I haven't had a chance to reread all of this stuff yet. But in general, how would you like to proceed? Maybe they can't hear us very well.
Were you directing that question at Jonathan?
John's still muted, so.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time hearing you
I was
guys. And I think trying to screen share is probably not going to be the best thing, just because then it's really hard to sort of parse at least who's trying to say what.
Okay, so that's fine. So how should we proceed then?
I mean, I think people can have the document up in another window with. I assume everyone has access to it. If not, I mean, it's shared over in the right hand in the chat column. And yeah, so there's just a few things that we're going to be trying to touch on here. And I think everyone's sort of familiar with the context. Over in the other thread, we were about to just sort of go through and just have everyone just say where they're coming from. Just, you know, most people know each other, but just if anyone hasn't. So I just said Jonathan Bourne, grad student at Johns Hopkins, and I think Sean was about to just remind everyone who he is, I guess.
Sean Edwards from Southwest Research Institute, and I run the ROS Industrial Program.
And so we can just go right from left. So we're not sure if they're in the right order, but I guess Bill was about to introduce himself, so we can go left to right then.
Hello, I'm Bill Morris. I'm currently at a company called ESAS. Previously worked blogging at iHeart Robotics and causing other sorts of trouble with robots.
So Dave, I think you're next.
David Liu, just finished my PhD last year, currently Metro Robots, soon to be Bossa Nova Robotics.
I see Geoff next in line.
Yeah, Jeff, can you...
Jeff Biggs from AIST in Japan.
Cool.
And Ian?
I think you need to unmute yourself.
You're muted.
Yeah, I think he might not be able to say anything, so can just skip to Ferguson Aaron.
Mike Ferguson, Aaron Blaisdell, Fetch Robotics.
I think the order changes.
Yeah.
I don't think
I guess
I'm just gonna jump in. I'm Adolfo Rodriguez from Pal Robotics. Spain.
I think we're missing Mike.
Okay.
Yes, I think everybody is in the bottom right corner, so nobody knows where they are. Mike Curvis from ClearPath Robotics. Nice to see you all again.
I think that's everyone.
yeah, Jack's following up about trying to get in. Are you here yet, Jack?
He's not on the list.
Yeah, he made it to the other one, but I don't know what issues is.
Hopefully he joins.
We'll give him just a second.
I count 10 people here, so maybe it's a limit.
No.
That may be the case.
Is this connected to your OSRF email?
This is not. This is connected to the OSRF Oregon Google Plus, so that it gets posted to the link or whatever, the feed.
It's connected to this.
Fault. Apparently it's full.
What?
Yeah, it's full.
I can send him the link to the live discussion, but I can't, I think. Yeah, so here's the YouTube link, but unfortunately we only have so many spots for participation, I guess. I'll send that.
This is
Yeah. Let me follow the YouTube link, and I'll just follow along and throw things in the chat if needed. How about that?
That'll work too. I'll email the link.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Yeah, it's linked to the OSRF org. I thought that it would use the.
Well, so we ran this on the ROS account, which is
It's a Google group.
well, it's a Google Plus entity,
Okay.
which is managed by us at OSRF, but is not officially on our org.
org. Nice.
So we don't get the bigger limit.
Yeah.
But it goes to the ROS YouTube.
Oh, there's Jack.
Hi, Jack. Welcome.
Hello. Oh, he's probably still living.
Hey, maybe.
Okay, so hopefully Jack will start loading. Oh, he doesn't have audio. Okay. Unclear if he can.
Hear us or.
Switch this out.
Okay, so Jack will be typing his comments. And that was a fun 20 minutes of getting everyone into the same window. So I don't know how many people have had time to take a look at the sort of brief agenda, but the two main goals here for this discussion today are to just define the requirements for ROS 1 and ROS 2 interoperability at the build tool level, and then see if we can flesh out a better idea of the roadmap and relationship between CAC and Make, CAC and Tools, and the Amit Tools prototype, and the sort of Amit build pattern that you guys have developed at OSRF. I think we've all sort of accepted that, and people can. This is where people can start commenting on this here just a second. But it seems like the general opinion from the mailing list is that a lot of people think that the changes that Amit brings to the build tools are really good. They fix a lot of problems, but I think really what a lot of people are concerned about is the overhead that switching to a new tool would incur, and sort of as well as just any sort of backlash that the community might experience in the introduction of sort of yet another build tool standard. So I think people have seen sort of the couple background links, at least the first two, which are the document that Dirk put up on the Amit build tool, as well as I think most people are familiar with the CAC and Tools project and the functions that provides. What a lot of people might not be familiar with are the sort of pending major contributions that are still sort of under review and testing to CAC and Tools that try to solve some of the same problems that Amit Tools does, but without sort of at least at the workspace level. There's a summary of the meta build tools in there, which is a slightly modified version of the one that I put out in my, I guess, op-ed on meta build tools. And then we have a list of discussion topics. So I figured we could just work through the discussion topics, just starting about the use cases and costs for using and transitioning to between these tools, both for package authors and package users. But I guess before we get started on that, does that seem like a reasonable sort of scope for this, or does anyone think that we should focus on anything else in particular?
That sounds good to me. I don't know about everyone else here, but that seems like a reasonable way to approach it.
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. Yeah, so just starting off at the top here, I think we're all basically in agreement that the ROS ecosystem is thoroughly federated. The packages are coming from all manner of places, different qualities, and currently not too many different build tools. But obviously, we need to be able to build all of these things in one place. I think, does anyone just sort of have anything to add to maybe some less focused use cases or any sort of requirements that might not be met by the current existing tools? And then sort of how does this play into Catkin Simple and Catkin and the relationship to Amit Auto? And I have a couple questions on Amit Auto before we get off this topic. So I'll yield to anyone else.
I can mention a couple of things which I would say are minor, but I would say that better support for SO versioning would be appreciated. That's something that can be done at the CMake level. It's just that it's something that hasn't permeated to the standard ROS or Catkin practices. And apart from that, this goes maybe to the packaging level, but I'm just going to throw it in there as well. I've seen it a couple of times on the mailing lists. Being able to have more fine-grained division of package content, such as binaries, development packages, documentation, that's also something that I think, at least from the point of view of a company, can be much appreciated, because when you're shipping a robot, you don't necessarily want to ship documentation packages or development packages on board the robot. So just out of the top of my head, I would say those two things.
I can speak to at least one of them. So the SO versioning is definitely something we should try to get people familiar with. There was some discussion a while back, and I know Jack was involved with it as well as some other people, about how the versioning should go, because there's a small distinction between the version of a library and the version of the package that it's in. So if you have a package with more than one library, then you can end up with this weird thing where you want to change, one thing in one of the libraries, but if you use the package version, that forces you to update the version of the library of the SO of multiple SOs when some of those SOs weren't updated. This is sort of parallel to like having packages in one repository where they all have to be in version lock with each other. We never really came up with a good rule of thumb for that. So, I don't think that ever got resolved. We should definitely talk about it, though. I don't know, maybe that's best served offline. I'm not sure how much detail we want to go into here. With respect to the packaging, as we try to capture everything you need to do packaging, so that we can, you can, out of the box get more than one packaging scheme out of it. We don't do that a whole lot yet. We have Fedora and we have Ubuntu, and we'd like to have, Homebrew. Of course, we'd like to have had that for a long time, but the idea is we capture information in a packaging agnostic way. But when it comes to separating the file contents, we haven't come up with a good way to capture that information. And it's not clear that it would translate well to more than just Deadman, for example. So I think both those topics are interesting. I think it needs some more discussion. So I don't know how to proceed from there.
Yeah, maybe I think talking about packaging, like even just as a separate topic later on, or even starting a thread on that on the mailing list, could be pretty interesting. And also, so I don't know if you guys saw, but so David Liu commented that he taught a class last semester, and he decided that ROSMake was actually the easiest way to go. I guess he hasn't said much more on on that, but I think a lot of us can sort of talk from experience, saying that, for better or worse, despite the fact that Kakin embraces some more standard patterns, it also introduces some very non-standard ones. So I think just sort of keeping that in mind. I think what I expect from my own experience is that the reason why I went with ROSMake was just because it probably required less CMake, basically, just because there are sort of fewer functions to call, fewer times that dependencies need to be stated, things like that. And I think Amit tools, which was sort of built, or sort of Amit Auto, which was sort of built out of Kakin Simple, or to serve the same sort of purposes as Kakin Simple, is really targeting those issues. So it's good to see that Amit Auto is sort of up there and built as a sort of main component of the Amit approach. Yeah, so he said ease of use is key for a lot of users, which I think we can all agree on, especially as one of the biggest markets for ROS and open source robotics right now is in academia, where you're going to get a lot of people who don't have a lot of software development experience. So if he has any more to say on that, I'll forward that in.
We had the same experience, and I agree completely.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, ClearPath has staffed up a lot in the last year. We've probably brought in several dozen software engineers, a lot of ex-BlackBerry people. It hasn't generally been an issue, but we've never really considered an alternative. I guess there is the advantage there that they're not students and they're not people starting toy packages from scratch. It's people hacking on existing stuff, so there's a lot of submersion before you get into creating your own thing. I think just to the original question about use cases, something we're finding a lot now is we're looking at lower power systems, and so we have some performance engineers who are specifically doing like looking for hot code and doing optimizations on stuff. And it's very difficult to merge that kind of thing upstream. And so we have a lot of cases where we're forking stuff internally and then trying to maintain, obviously that's a whole hairy ball of concern, like when you get a lot of long-lived forks, but I feel like there are maybe things that the tooling could do better to support that. If I fork like navigation or whatever, does that condemn me forever to build that from source until I push those changes upstream, or is there some reasonable way that I can have a version of navigation that's 1.11.3-ClearPath that contains those patches in perpetuity? Like obviously the Linux kernel manages this with patched versions abounding, so that might be something to think about too.
So for some of the stuff we've been doing, we've had reasonable luck getting engineers up and running with Katkin, though most of them aren't actually doing anything with it, and we've had quite a bit of confusion when it comes to managing dependencies, especially between packages. External dependencies seem to be a little bit easier for people. Dependencies between packages seems to fill in the build system more.
And do you say that with respect to managing dependencies in sort of the merge devel environment, so the default behavior of cat can make?
So I don't really. We used ROS-WS to set up the workspace, bring all this stuff down, and then we have a production workspace and a development workspace on our robot. And basically it allows the people to switch back and forth and not update the production code without testing it first. And so that's one of the things we've been sort of dealing with. And then when we build the code, what's happening is that we'll have like a message package and a non-message package, and those aren't getting ordered properly when we're trying to build them in Jenkins. Things like that. People just have trouble with Katkin, trying to do more advanced things with it.
Yeah, so that sounds exactly like the sort of issues that people run into with sort of having to explicitly specify target dependencies, and so fortunately that's one of those things that is definitely helped through the isolated build pattern from the cat can make isolated and cat can make isolated parallel that Will put together that turned into Katkin tools. and that isolated build is continued to be used in AML. So hopefully at least the work that's already been done and the current prototype should alleviate a lot of those interdependency or inter-target dependency issues, since it will sort of discretize that at the package level.
It might also be nice to have some sort of optional dependency set up for builds. I know we have some internal messages that we're using to record camera information, like the serial numbers of each individual camera in the data stream, so that if we have to swap out a camera in the field, we can go back and look at the ROS spec to figure out which camera was actually installed. And so when we go to push out our changes, we've already linked in these message packages, so it's hard for us to push those changes back up. Right? Like we have a special package that announces the Velodyne serial number. Right? So to integrate that sort of into the rest of it, it's sort of strange for us to be able to integrate that. Just in a hardware message, but that would be an optional dependency. Would be nice.
So are you saying an optional dependency like a debug dependency or something something different?
So like with certain packages, you can compile it with optimization, same type of thing.
It's like a build it against it if it's there, like discovery type of thing, right?
Yeah, more or less.
Which you can probably do today just using like a find package, and then if not found, do thing X, otherwise do thing Y.
And now we're back at learning CMake.
Sure, yeah.
But I mean, we're not trying to hide CMake from you.
Yeah. Well, I do think though that if you did try doing that in a source workspace, you could detect it with CMake, but if you happen to drop it into your source directory to build it, it might not be built in the right order if there's no annotation of it in the package manifest. So even if CMake can use it optionally, it doesn't mean that that the dependency would be
evaluated.
Yeah, would be built.
You can have a dependency, and the build tool doesn't care if you have a dependency that's not in the workspace. The only thing is when you start to release it. So if you started to release that package, you would either need to explicitly add a raw step rule for that package name that's evaluated to something empty, or maybe that's the point at which we could have some support in our release infrastructure for a dependency that can't resolve it, just ignores it. So I don't know.
There's also a level that when you're releasing it, you want to choose whether or not it's there.
Yeah.
And like, if you're choosing to if you're choosing to release it without the dependency, you should strip the dependency and not declare the dependency. If you're choosing to release it with the dependency, you should leave it in, and it'll be required. Because it'd be really bad if, say, the build farm got an optional dependency, and then one cycle through and built with it, and then like 3 months later, somebody else removed it as a dependency, and it suddenly disappeared.
You can get it transitively, I think is what Tully is saying. Some package could have it installed.
Transit dependency could disappear, and suddenly your build would be entirely different.
Yeah.
So that definitely sounds like another use case that we can start a thread on to discuss, because it does sound like something that hasn't really been proposed before. But yeah, it's interesting. So does anyone else want to bring up anything else on use cases or what we've just been talking about, sort of these needs, just to set the stage for the following discussions?
You had the previous use case how the two systems need to work together for like applications like the bridge, for example. I don't know, that was before on the map. I don't know if that's still later.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about that now. It's sort of implied in solutions for incorporating the capabilities of CMake into a new release of CAC-and-Make or alternative solutions to that. But we can just make that a bullet point explicitly. It's sort of one of the overriding goals across all these things, is to just sort of keep that in mind, how these things can interact.
So I think for some of the stuff I've seen, better support for embedded systems is really one of those key points that's going to cause us more pain in the future. Being able to keep Arduino stuff in the tree and get that built and pushed out to actual hardware. Things like that, being able to work with faster CPUs and be able to push out, smaller packages that can actually be run on the embedded systems, such as the Raspberry Pis and things.
Where do you see the task for like the build system in that?
Well, this goes into the being able to separate out documentation and being able to create optimized builds. So special compile flags, things like that. And then I think I mentioned in the mailing list thread, being able to have the firmware build and the firmware install steps a little bit more transparent, or a little bit easier to implement.
Bill, when you say special build flags, are you explicitly cross-compiling, or are you just... Yes, okay. So you are also doing some CMake setup. You're using CMake and explicitly setting up the cross-compiling variables.
That would be the idea. Because the embedded system may not have Linux on it.
Okay.
Okay, so let's move on then to this sort of overarching goal, which is talking about how to incorporate the new patterns that Ament has implemented with the current CMake, the current Catkin libraries. So this is what Dirk was just bringing up, and sort of in the case where you want a ROS1 and ROS2 bridge, how do you build this code without things breaking horribly? But at the same time, how can we build these new patterns into Catkin without, requiring everyone to rewrite their CMake lists? And I know the first thing there is, well, people are going to need to write install targets if they want to use the sort of symlink install that Ament uses. But let's see if we can just talk about those things then, because adding install targets is one thing. Having to rewrite, all instances of Catkin and all the functions and all that is something else. So I guess, Dirk, if you want to just start on that.
Well, I think there are like two very different requirements. The one is for the bridge, we need to be able to compile code which uses ROS1 and uses ROS2 in order to make both systems bridgeable on a network level. So I need to be able to compile C++ code which finds ROS1 parts, like the ROS CVP, for example, and finds the client library in ROS2, and can use them both. And since all this package management, or all the package information is embedded in CMake config files, that boils down to we need to be able to find the packages in CMake, ROS CVP and RCL CVP in this case, and also message packages, to then build a new executable which is able to talk to both systems. It's just like a usage of the build system. It doesn't require any mixture of Catkin and Ament. It just needs to be able to use what has already been built before. I think that's like the use case which we have in order to satisfy implementing a bridge. And then there is the second part you brought up, like how can they be similar to each other? How can features be ported from one to another system? And that's I think an open question. First, do we need to have them both be interoperable in the same workspace, stuff like that, or are they just considered to be separate?
I would just say quickly, I think what's interesting, my engineering senses are tingling about this business of the bridge, the ROS1-2 bridge being the defining use case for Ament, because it feels pathological. Catkin supports, via Catkin tools, you can build a plain CMake package, and Ament seems to support the same thing. So it seems like the bridge could just be a CMake package for the purposes of both build systems, rather than having to structure the new build system such that it can coexist in this incredibly peaceful way with the old one.
Well, there's an exceptional thing. If you want to use a plain CMake package to build a bridge, you need to be able to find package all the resources you need. And if there are two packages in ROS1 and ROS2 with the same name, you can, by fact, just not find package both. It's not possible in CMake.
Okay.
So even without catkin, without amend, if we would use plain CMake, we cannot have duplicate package names.
So let me just state a really important concern I have. You're basically asking right now to double the package maintenance work, and that's actually the part that sort of scares me, because I personally have noticed my productivity in terms of commits to GitHub and the amount of software that I'm able to publish. Once I moved from academia and whatever, my last startup, to this current job, I'm pushing out less code. And for me to be able to double that workload, in addition to meeting the current requirements I have and my day job, is really difficult. I have trouble getting people to let me push out code as it is. I've been told I can do it once everything else is done from the CEO. You know, it's not a publishing open source is not a priority of the company. And so asking to double our workload for every developer, I think, is a huge request. And so I would prefer if the bridge required more work and every other package was easier. If you had to manually compile a bridge every time and there was no pre-built bridge, I'm okay with that. I'm much more happier with that than anything we can do to make it easier to support ROS 1 and ROS 2 for the developers who are maintaining the multitude of packages we have.
So it is already the case that you have to compile the bridge for whatever packages you have on your system manually. You cannot have a generic bridge because we have like C++, which needs compile time all types. We, as far as I know, I have not heard any technical approach on the mailing list how we can achieve that. We are very happy to hear suggestions how we can keep the package names the same. That would be really favorable. I completely agree. We are just not aware of a technical way to achieve that. If we have an idea how to do that, we are more than happy to go down that route.
Can I also point out that if we had not changed the build system at all between ROS 1 and ROS 2, we'd have exactly the same problem. The problem is that if we want to change messages at all, in any way, between ROS 1 and ROS 2, you will have this problem. So I agree. I agree that we should try to be avoiding as much work as possible, but it's a little bit wanting to have your cake and eat it too, to be able to make changes, but also have no work be done in order to utilize those changes. So I don't know. I think we need to look at what the problems are and what solutions can be had from them.
So this is a solution that will cause William to scream, but I'm just like, here's like a sort of insane way that, say you have sensor messages and you bind package that, whether under ROS 1 or ROS 2, but there's like a compiler defined. So you have a single sensor messages /camera.h, and inside of that, you either get a huge block of code that's the ROS 1 serialization, or you get a different huge block that's the ROS 2 serialization, and which of those you get depends on some flag that's been passed into the compiler. Like, I mean, we wouldn't want to do that, but that seems like a horrible way that you could get one or the other serialization depending which
is clear. That's C++ already, so we have to take a step backwards from that to CMake. So first you need to be able to find this thing.
Well, so for CMake, I mean, what's to say that in the whatever ROS distribution, whatever ROS 1 distribution is released at the time that ROS 2 comes out, that when you find, maybe we do, put version numbers into the find package calls in ROS 2, and I mean, I don't know about the sort of default behavior for a find package when you don't have a version versus you do have a version, and if that will run into the same problem Dirk was talking about before. But I feel like there should be some way to make it so that it behaves the same way without really requiring to double the number of message packages. But that's,
I think so too. I think we're making a terrible mistake by throwing out all these messages. I think that the mandatory changes that have been explained to me are all things that can be handled by character string substitutions and simple tricks at the message generation level, and to warp the entire design of ROS2 by throwing out all of the old messages and changing the type names for every single thing, just to make ROS1 bridge easier to implement. And the current ROS1 bridge is hopelessly naive anyway. It's not anything we're going to actually be able to use. We're going to need some way of doing real introspection, and that's not going to happen because somebody at build time built two different kinds of message generation.
Yeah, not to mention the fact that really the value of one of the biggest value points of ROS is that it's really just an agreement, right? ROS is an agreement that a bunch of us are going to use a lot of similar message types so that our code can interoperate. So without taking advantage of that, Jack has a good point. It's really important that these things don't change so much. Even if a small change would necessitate a lot of CMake hackery, requiring a lot of them to change is definitely going to be a big issue. And I know that there's been a lot of discussion about changes to the messages and as well as changes to the sort of message variable conventions and things. And I feel like a lot of people are going to have a lot to say about that, and maybe we should bump that to another discussion. I'm not saying it's not important, but it would be good to talk a little bit more about just the build systems, just to keep this focused. I think the messages are a huge thing, and I wouldn't be surprised if that was one of the next discussions, the next live discussions.
I think one important part for this discussion in the first place is that the goal of ROS2 is that it does not share a code base with ROS1. So what we do actively want to avoid is having a package like std messages, which is used as a package, like a source repository for ROS1 and ROS2 at the same time, because that makes it impossible to do changes without affecting ROS1, which is one of the core design goals we want to avoid. We do not want to disrupt ROS1. And regarding that aspect, there will be code in general. If we look ROS2 down the road 2 years, there will be code which will be maintained for ROS1 as well as for ROS2 during that migration process. I think that's a basic thing we have to admit, that that's nothing we can avoid if we want to keep those two systems separate and want to be able to evolve ROS2 from ROS1.
That's absurd. I mean, we manage to evolve messages all the time in ROS. Some messages change in Hydro or Indigo. We can have a branch and make a change to a message.
Right, Jack. I think Dirk's point was when you create a branch, that means you fork development, and you have two parallel development paths. We're talking about one more fork, which is for the new version. And it's not the message definitions. We're not throwing out the message definitions. We are simply taking the message definitions, mutating them slightly. The majority of them will not change, but we're taking the opportunity to do things like strip the sequence out. And those are things that we've talked about doing a long time ago. That's why we're doing this ROS 2.0. We're saying this is a slightly bigger fork than the fork between Hydro and Indigo.
But you should be able to do the things that are required without having to modify the messages. We can still make header be a synonym for standard messages header, and we can still make time be a synonym for standard messages time, or whatever you want to call it.
I agree. Those things can be done for keeping backward compatibility, either as backward compatibility in ROS2 or forward compatibility in ROS1. That's both fine. I think the one thing which is the biggest discussion point is the naming of the packages. And you mentioned that it is all simple with doing string substitution concatenation, which I don't see the path for that. If we have a follow-up discussion on the mailing list and we can have a rough sketch how package names can be still the same in ROS1 and ROS2, we would be very, very happy about that because we would spend the effort, even if it takes more effort than the current prototype, to keep the names. But technically, we did not see a way, not with more effort, not with any effort, to achieve that. Because from our knowledge, if I'm in CMake and I call find package foo with a version number, without a version number,
you keep saying it's impossible.
From my technical understanding of CMake, which is not very shallow, I don't see a way to do it. If people understand how to implement that, we are more
I'm going to jump in here, and maybe we can plan on having a deeper discussion about this technical issue, specifically finding these packages.
I would like to say one thing, John.
Yeah.
If all it takes in order to get rid of this disaster with the message names is to completely get rid of ROS1 bridge and have a completely different implementation that has nothing to do with CMake, then that's a win.
It's easy to say that and not have a way to actually achieve it. I'm sorry, I can't sit here and just be told that it's easy to say it's impossible, and it's also easy to say that it's not. I mean,
meanwhile,
really
something
hard
that
to make them.
Can I just throw one slightly different question in there?
Yeah.
Sure.
Going back to the discussion of you were discussing sort of separate code bases and whatnot. Are you intending to sort of keep obviously this is different for ROS.com and whatnot, but for higher level packages, maybe the message packages, you expect those to all be separate GitHub repos? Do you plan to keep them still in sort of the same, like right now we have like the ROS-star orgs? Is the intent also that we would actually have like ROS2-star orgs, or how far does OSRF see going with some of these?
So technically, we don't need to have different repositories. It would be perfectly feasible if you have a repository foo with a package foo to create a branch. I don't know how the next version of ROS2 will be called, but have a ROS2 branch beside the Jade branch, and have slight modifications, whatever is necessary, to keep that like the same. So if your code base is like mostly agnostic to the ROS interface itself, you should be pretty fine like merging changes back and forth between the branches.
So we sort of blocked out an hour for this. I still have some more time. I don't know who else still has some more time about this. There are clearly a lot of things that we want to talk about. One thing that I just wanted to bring this back to is the relationship between Emmet tools, Kaken tools, and Kaken Make. So we've been wanting to get broader use of Kaken tools for a while now. There's still obviously a bunch of features that we want to merge in and test, but both Kaken tools and Emmet tools share some of the same design patterns architecturally, in that they build things in isolation. They at least aim to build things in parallel. That's what Kaken tools does and what Emmet tools would do. And they both pretty much don't care about what's inside of a given package. Emmet tools is built so that has it's sort of pluggable, so it can work with any other build tools that have a similar sort of devel support, like either the Emmet CMake or the sort of Python setup tools develop mode. So to the guys at OSRF, and just after they pipe in, anyone else can jump in on this. How do you see, is Emmet tools, do you think, going to stay separate? Do you see adding support for building Emmet-like packages, even as they're sort of in development, into Kaken tools? Or do you see the features of Kaken tools being merged with Emmet tools as whatever this new thing is that works on Python 2 and Python 3 and can build old Kaken type packages, pure CMake, other types that are used in the community, like Rock Robotics uses this autoproj system, which used to be compatible with the ROS build manifest, but isn't anymore. And how do you guys see that working out?
So I think one thing comes down where the two tools are different is that an Emmet package itself, without using a special tool to build it, supports like a local package-specific setup file to set up its own environment. So whenever I build that package with, for example, CMake, it will have a local setup file which I can source to get whatever environment variable I need, like a ROS package path, a ROS master, I don't know. Most of them might not apply for ROS2, but as an idea. They can set up a Python path. They can set up a path, LD library path, whatever. And that's one of the slight differences in amend tools and Catkin tools. I think we all agree that Catkin make, because of his like one CMake context for everything, is not scalable. That's why CMake isolated, Catkin make isolated was developed, and afterwards Catkin tools. And as soon as Catkin tools has like hopefully all the features CMI currently already has, which is very, very little off, I think that will be the recommended tool for ROS1. For the amend tools, the current state is much smaller than what Catkin tools does. It has much less features. The idea we had in mind is that all the common functionality, like the job server, etc., like things like this, configuring your like workspaces, this should be reused between both tools. So most of the functionality from Catkin tools would be moved to a third package, which is OSRF PyCommon. A little of the functionality is already there, but not the majority. And then both tools, Catkin tools as well as amend tools, can use the functionality from there. So amend tools doesn't need to re-implement a job server, but use the same implementation.
So I would also add to that is that OSRF PyCommon really also I wanted it to capture things that are useful outside of those tools. So for example, the ability to run sub-processes and capture the output with color and all that stuff that I put a lot of effort into, we might reuse that in a launch system and other command line tools and things like that. It is a lot of work to maintain two user interfaces, two porcelains for Catkin tools and a Mint, and then even if you have this common shared implementation. So I think we'll have to see how that evolves. It may be that they end up really close to each other, and if that's the case, maybe we do something where like they share more than just like the job server and build type plugin and stuff like that, like where they can share like as much as possible. Basically, I want them to be identical, almost identical, to the point where we may end up with one tool, but that we'll have to see how close they end up. So
we're about to go into overtime just before anyone else jumps in. One thing I just wanted to just throw out there, single sentence, before some people might need to leave, is there any interest in calling Ament something like something with ROS in it?
Well, so I'll start with the reason Catkin doesn't have something with ROS in it. Is that it doesn't have anything to do with ROS necessarily. And in fact, there are people using Catkin without ROS. So I would argue that a Mint is a similar boat, which is that it does not necessarily have to be used with ROS. So simply from a logical standpoint, it doesn't necessarily have to have a name involving ROS. It could though. We very well could call these tools whatever the ROS build tools, right, instead of Catkin tools or Mint tools. The issue is that they don't have any direct dependency on things like that are very ROS specific, things like message generation and launch files and bag files and all this stuff. And I think that's actually a good thing that the build tools don't depend on those things. That there's an isolation there, and if we want to incorporate tools that use features from both or that provide some interoperability, that's best done with plugins. And that's why I've worked so hard to make sure that Catkin tools is pluggable. So if you wanted to add to the Catkin command a command that is able to, whatever, query like the ROS build farm for information or something like that, then that's totally fine, but it should be a plugin so that it's dependency injection as opposed to the build tools having a dependency on those things.
Yeah, so architecturally it sounds great, but at the end of the day, this is designed for the ROS community. It's meant to be used by the ROS community, and I think just throwing back to ease of use and just sort of intuition for a lot of people who were first introduced to ROS, and really, like I was saying before, ROS 2 is not going to, this is really just an agreement between all of us to use similar stuff, right? And so if ROS 2, in the same way ROS 1 is such an agreement, ROS 2 doesn't have anything to do with ROS 1 either, architecturally even. So except maybe sharing some message definitions. But the point is that the community should be the same. And I just wanted to put that out there with respect to sort of branding of this stuff, just to sort of keep it all together. So anyway, I've been talking a lot, so I'll let a bunch of other people jump in.
I think that's a fair point. I've often imagined, just having a single ROS command, which is able to invoke, like Catkin's build, for example, and I think there's probably an opportunity there for a more like vertically integrated, endpoint solution for users, which is, ROS do this thing, and I just think, at least for our work in ROS 2, we're not there yet. We don't have the tools in place to build out that tool yet. I don't know. I mean, what are the suggestions? I mean, if people make suggestions, we can talk about it, but I don't know. No?
So yeah, we're definitely into overtime now. Is there anything else that, I mean, we can keep talking about this. I'm happy to keep talking about it. Is there anything, I guess, starting with some of the things that we didn't talk about on the agenda, or things that weren't even on there that anyone wanted to talk to while we're still sort of in this low latency communication channel?
So, this is Sean. I had one major question, which was, it sounded like there wasn't going to be a tool to convert Catkin CMake, or well, essentially from Catkin to Ament, and I didn't quite understand why that wasn't possible, but I think that is going to be a tremendous burden for us, given the number of packages that we have to convert.
Okay, no, I can answer that one. There's no reason technically or from a policy standpoint that we can't have a tool like that. I think that maybe what we meant was we're not going to spend time on that right this second because, or probably even this year, because I think that it will not be time for people to be en masse converting things from Catkin to Ament in that time period. So I think that will happen. It will be best to do that right before we want people to start doing it, because then we'll avoid having to refactor that tool based on changes that may happen between now and then in Catkin and in Ament. I mean, we very well may change Ament. Based on our discussions, we may change the name of it, we may change the way the CMake code works to make it more in line with Catkin. There may be a lot of things that change in the build system before we're ready to recommend people converting to it. And so that tool should be best done closer to that point in time, I think. But there's no technical reason nor policy reason that we can't do it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it would be interesting if the only thing you need to do to convert a Catkin package to an Ament package is to add install targets.
Certainly not, because one significant difference is that in order to allow Ament Auto to do what Catkin Simple was supposed to do and never was able to achieve, is that the Ament package call, which is very similar to the Catkin package call, happens after all targets in order to verify that whatever you export has actually been created as a target. And this slight change will need to be reflected during the migration. So you have to move the code. The Ament article has some examples at the bottom linked. So it's very similar CMake code, but sometimes the location of a function is different in both. So it's currently not the case that it's just a simple rename of functions and rebuild.
I was very surprised to hear this requirement that ROS 1 and 2 be totally isolated. I definitely pictured that, navigation or whatever could, these huge bodies of code that already exist, would be able to exist for some time supporting both. Yeah. And so I think that's interesting to hear that one distinction that, okay, the package call goes in a different place. But could you have a single CMake list that would be both a Catkin CMake list and an Ament CMake list, and it could be supported for some time under both systems?
It's not only about the build system in order to make your package be ROS 1 and ROS 2 compatible at the same time. There are way more API changes already, which we have worked on, and probably way more to come. If you think about changes like in ROS 1, where we have nodes and nodelets, and ROS 2 design goal is to unify that, that means the API is going to change. So a navigation package which uses that client library API needs to be adopted to use the new API. You can always say it would be nice to have an abstraction layer which like maps most of the old API to the new API. That's definitely something which we'll look into. But I don't expect it to be like a 100% API shim, which maps everything you had before with exactly the same behavior to a new implementation under the hood.
It may all map, but it may not be possible to provide the same qualitative behavior. Yeah. So we're going to try our best to make the case for maintaining one piece of software for both as good as possible. But sort of back to what they were talking about before, we don't want that to warp the design of ROS 2. Like, we don't want to avoid fixing a problem that really needs to be fixed just because ROS 1 exists. And you know, it is certainly something we consider, and it has a great deal of weight in our decision making. But it's also, we have to be careful not to, you know, to just not change things or be afraid to change things that need to be changed just because it's going to incur some migration costs.
I guess ultimately, if the bridge is of high quality, then hopefully it's not a big deal because you either use it before or after, and one way or another, all the pieces fit together. But it just feels like there's going to be a cost there. I know. Like certainly when we did the ROS build to Catkin migration here, we didn't really try to do blended workspaces at all. We basically just put the hammer down, did the rising tide, and within a few weeks it was all Catkin. And yeah.
I don't expect it to be the same, honestly.
That's very much why we're really focused on making sure that we can do the bridge and be able to run a hybrid system. The packages will have to be either on side A or side B, and obviously the dependencies will have to be all on the same side. But you can run your entire navigation stack on ROS 1, but then run your vision detection code in ROS 2, have the optimized pipeline, and interact with the ROS 1 navigation stack. And then eventually the navigation stack will flip sides, and the rest of your system will keep running ROS 1, the navigation stack, and the cameras are now in the ROS 2 world, and incrementally packaged across the border. And that's important for the adoption process. We've seen that with the ROS build Catkin transition. We've seen the things like with Python 2, Python 3. We can't have this like major divide that the whole system has to cross. It's going to have to cross incrementally.
So I have a question actually with respect to ROS 1, the actual implementation of such a ROS 1, ROS 2 bridge. Is there any reason why instead of having a bridge, the internals of the ROS 1 serialization and transport wouldn't just be re-implemented to use ROS 2 and whatever its DDS backend is?
At the wire level, they wouldn't be compatible.
Well, no, but so if you have a, say, like, we're on Ubuntu 16.04 or something, and you've got the latest release of ROS 1, and ROS 2 has been out and prototyped, and why can't the sort of underlying transport that ROS 1 uses just be exactly the same as what ROS 2 is using?
Yeah, so you're saying basically re-implement ROS 1's interface using ROS 2. So we want to do something like that so that you can have code that was written for ROS 1 be in a ROS 2 system. We're going to look into that. I think automatically doing that for people is going to be probably bad because, if you have some complicated ROS 1 code and they're relying on certain behavior of the system, just swapping the guts out underneath for ROS 2 will probably result in some changes in behavior that are subtle but cause problems. It's a little bit, we sort of noticed this. We had some problems, like, for example, when we swapped TF2 out from under the hood for TF1, we had it suddenly that Hydro and Groovy no longer TF would communicate with each other, even though they were both using TF1. For example, not that that's something we should try to guarantee, but it did happen. So I think we should be careful about swapping the guts out. Maybe it's an option.
I I think if the
As
issue.
a requirement for the bridge, I think that's.
Sorry, second.
Where as a requirement for the bridge that ROS 1's guts be replaced with ROS 2 is a bit steep, probably.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's at a high level, right? Or even if people are using the transport hints, right? Aside from, you know, I guess it's not clear to me what sort of emergent dynamics or sort of feedback that would cause something to break, like you just mentioned with TF versus TF2. Why that would be impacted by just changing the wire language, right? You know, you would need, of course, to implement it both in ROS CVP and ROS Pi and ROS Java because they all currently do this on their own. But you know, if you can, you know, link the internal pub sub and service implementations to, you know, the whatever the new ROS middleware library is called, and that seems like that's probably going to be like the most straightforward way to make a bridge work if you can at least match up the message types.
I think the devil's in the details there. So,
yeah.
I mean, it's more than just the pub sub, right? The service response implementations. Yeah. It's also, well, for example, services. Services won't necessarily behave exactly the same way, you know, in ROS 1 and ROS 2. I would argue that ROS 2's behavior is better, but somebody may be relying on the behavior of that service. And then if you do swap the guts of ROS 1 out for ROS 2, and that does cause a problem, then that package that has the problem has no path forward, right? They have to like fix their code to address that issue.
But at the same time, I mean, I feel like the behavior of, you know, ROS services and ROS messages is pretty well defined, and you know we should, and you know, even in the corner cases.
But it's not just that, though. It's also like execution, for example, like the way spinning works and stuff like that. Like, I think we can map it to ROS 2, but just because I can't foresee a scenario where it produces a different result or behavior or a problem and something that goes on top of it, doesn't mean that can't happen. And I'm not saying we shouldn't try it because it may not work. I'm just saying we shouldn't rely on the idea that it will work because it very likely won't.
Yeah, of course not. I'm just saying as an alternative to trying to, you know, reshape everything else around this bridge. If there's another option that is sort of transparent to the existing code, then maybe that's worth.
Yeah, and you still need to convert between the messages if there are any changes. So you know that logic has to be in there somewhere, sort of like a bag migration.
But for messages that don't change much, that, you know, might be a very trivial step, or it might just be you know, sort of renaming, or if we are maintaining messages so that they're you know, as you know, I don't know what the plan is for distributions of ROS 2, but if a ROS 2 distribution is synced with a distribution of ROS 1 with respect to its message definitions, then at least that should be a pretty trivial thing to do, I think. At least that little part of it. I agree. There are lots of, you know, technical details that need to be worked out, but this is sort of a different approach that might be a viable option.
One of the complexities, I think, why this was not the first thing we like in the direction we went, is because we've seen during the catcan deployment that putting catcan under ROS build, trying to keep ROS build working on top of the newly introduced catcan system, which would be very similar to that like approach, using ROS 2 with like new message generation code, new wire format, new like logic for parameter servers, actions, etc. Putting that under the implementation of ROS 1 is a very difficult thing because the chances for regressions and disruption are very high. And that's something which I think might be very, very high cost. Because even with like the best effort to try to make it like perfectly stable without like creating a problem, reality will be when we add something like this, we will break stuff.
Now, it may be possible that we can have like ROS 1 and then ROS 1 implemented with ROS 2, which is what you have to use in order to have some bridge with ROS 2. That might be a thing you could do, but again, we'd have to look into it. I mean, we're a little far away from that right now, but maybe that is a path forward. The other thing that I wanted to mention with respect to like all these changes with respect to the message packages and stuff, there's a chance that in the future we can have a more intelligent bridge which doesn't require build time infrastructure to work, which would remove the requirement that the message packages have different names. And we're going to look into that, but and because we want that to be the case for people's higher level messages, especially if you have a package which has code and messages co-located with each other, it doesn't make sense that you have to change the name of that package in order to port it to ROS 2. And then continue to use it with you know, with packages in ROS 1. So we want to make sure that that's the case. And to do that, we think we can do it with a more complicated bridge, but we just don't have the machinery in place to do that yet. That requires us to be able to, at least on the ROS2 side or the ROS1 side or both, be able to read a message definition at runtime and publish and subscribe data to and from that message type without having had compiled code go with it. It's something we want to have. We don't have it right now. And so, without that feature right now, changing the name of the messages was the only way we saw we could make the bridge easily, or at all, actually, at the moment. So, we're going to try to do that, and in the future, because the code base that relies on ROS1 or ROS2 is small, if we decide that we can do that effectively, we can go and we can reverse this decision on the message names changing. But that's the best, I don't know, prognosis I have for the message name, the names of message packages at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, the fact that there are sort of some, turnaround points, if those could be well defined at some point, that would be great. But yeah, it sounds like, there are going to be some solutions that are going to make it easier to get a bridge rapidly, but that might still incur a lot of sort of cost in the community versus a sort of, like you're saying, even some sort of dynamic runtime bridge that might take longer to be developed, but at the end would save man hours overall, woman hours.
The question will be if we go for that way and we use a dynamic Python-based bridge which does everything at runtime, that would also make the decision that nobody can ever write a program which uses both client libraries at the same time.
They could, but they'd have to change their message names.
They could not use any existing message package.
Well, yeah, they'd have to fork them and change the names.
Which could be a restriction, like third-party people might find inconvenient because they might want to interact with both systems. I mean, there are system integrators which use ROS and integrate with different other middleware systems, so that they can just not write ever technically a connection to like ROS1, ROS2 at the same time. That might be limiting for them.
Well, I think that what you're hearing is that first-party people are finding it horribly inconvenient, the solution you've come up with so far.
Yeah,
I like the dynamic approach, and I think we ought to just work on that and quit messing with the messages as if it doesn't matter.
Well, it's not. Okay. Let's be fair. We don't think it doesn't matter, and we agree the dynamic approach would be better. But we also believe that the bridge is very important, and we wanted to show that it was possible and what that might look like, and that's why we've gone down this path. So, we're damned if we do make the bridge, and we're damned if we delay it. So I don't know what you want us to do. We're trying our best to balance the issues.
That's fair, but I don't see that the current bridge implementation proves much of anything.
It proves that we currently are feasible to have a demo which has like a ROS2 node reading a camera, publishing images, and use existing tools like RQT and Arbis to visualize those data. This is a core thing to demonstrate that people see that both systems can interoperate.
And it might be trivial to say that, oh, it's obvious they can interoperate, but that's not the case. We found all kinds of small things we've had to fix in making this demo to make sure that works. So for us, this is making sure that we're not doing anything that's going to bite us down the line. We know it's not a perfect solution. We'd like a better solution. We're just not there yet.
Well, I just think we're doing a lot more damage by pursuing this solution than by coming up with something else.
And I would also like to make it clear, like, none of this stuff is completely final. This is the way we think it has to be done right now. That's not to say that it is the way it will be done or it's the only way. And we really want people to discuss this and talk about other ideas, and we're open to changing things. Anything is on the table. But we have to come at this with the understanding that, there are technical limitations and there are technical concerns. And just saying, I don't like that approach, is useful information for us, because we got that. We got the message, and we don't like the message names to be changed. But at this point, we need constructive advice on what to do instead.
My advice is to come up with a dynamic solution. And if you want just a static pre-canned solution that's functionally similar to what we have right now, just write the damn code out in the bridge. If all you want to do is a handful of messages that you already pre-canned, just do them.
That might be an option. Maybe we can generate the code in ROS1 and just copy the result. That just makes it such that it doesn't evolve with ROS1, and it doesn't scale to other people's packages very easily.
Well, but it's just a proof of concept. It's obviously not going to scale to the real world anyway, because there's lots of messages out there. You're not going to pre-can all of them.
Well, okay. Well, we'll consider that. I mean.
Yeah. So I think what would be
I
really
would just
great.
say quickly about that. That's interesting. I mean, because ROS Java totally does, and so does ROS Serial. Like when you build ROS Serial client, it just dumps headers for every message it can find in the workspace. And we're actually doing that now too, because we're doing TF auto prefixing at the multi-robot boundary, and so that's also generating C++ code for all found messages. Anything that looks like a TF frame ID, it throws a prefix on or strips it off. So there's certainly lots of precedent for that.
Yeah, and ROS, the ROS Orcos bridge, the Orcos type kits are generated at a compile time for whichever specific message package you want, and that's just a CMake macro. But yeah, so I think the thing is, like, there are a lot of options. Clearly, the guys at OSRF want to make sure that what they're doing can actually be put into an integrated demo, so that the few components that they are developing for the long run, are developed in the right way. And what would be really great, I think, for especially the people involved in this chat, including the ones who have already left, to see where these sort of turn back or sort of these points where you're considering revisiting these sort of design decisions, so that to sort of get a sense of that time scale and to be able to contribute at the right points. Because maybe, for example, talking about conversion scripts is a little ahead of the game, since we don't necessarily know what we'd be converting to. But there are a lot of things right now that are worth talking about in order to debug the other parts. So I don't know if you guys have a timeline internally, or if that's still just sort of, you're still trying to figure out what the timescale is. But I think that would be really helpful to focusing discussion on these things. It's such a
I can tell you what our priority is. So right now, we're working towards our ROSCon talks, which are going to be demoing stuff that we think is interesting with the new ROS2 prototype. Things like real-time on embedded computers, intra-process communication that's very efficient for image processing. The bridge is one of them because we thought that was very important to demonstrate. Quality of service settings, how DDS's intrinsic value will help us with difficult communication scenarios. So our goal from now until ROSCon and probably shortly after will be pushing down those roads. After that, we'll be looking at trying to make a first release that people can actually use. I mean, it's going to be a very preliminary thing, but it's something that we'll say this is a version where we're going to tag that, and it won't. You can at least always get that copy of it as we continue to make changes. And then, so at some point around that time, or maybe shortly after, is when we'll start to look at what we've got and start reevaluating design decisions. And then we have a lot of choices, and then the system actually opens up to a lot of parallelization is possible, and I think it'll be a better time, an easier time for somebody from the community to get involved, because there'll be things that aren't so much in the critical path. Like a lot of things we're working on right now have to be in place and can't be changing under our feet in order to get something that works. But I think in short order we'll have we'll start looking at TF, we'll start looking at actions, we'll start looking at, and at the same time we'll be reflecting back on what we already have and making changes to that and getting feedback on that. So that's sort of, I would say that's my 6-month plan, if I look at my calendar.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. And I think when you start looking at things like TF and actions and other mid-level frameworks that are used all over ROS, that even in the really early on preliminary discussions, just to cast a broad net for ideas would be really great.
Yeah, we're going to try to do that better. I know we haven't done that well, and so we're going to try to involve you guys better, or more at that level. The other thing is, yeah, and there's a lot of topics like that. Like, for example, the robot description format. We have to.
It needs some love. So does ROS launch.
Yeah, ROS launch. Yeah, so we've got a thing internally, or a ROS2 thing. It's just a Python library that can run programs and capture the output and return code. That is not by no means a replacement for ROS launch. We have, but it's we would like to look at what ROS launch is, look at what we'd like it to be, and see where that falls in between. maybe we end up just porting ROS launch and then also having another thing. Maybe we end up with some hybrid system. I don't know. We have to discuss that. There's a lot of uncertainty about a lot of the components still. But we'll look at those going forward. And we're going to implement things that we have to have as we see they best should do. And then those are always on the table for discussion later to change the way that's done if people disagree. Like with the message names. We're totally open to changing that. We just need to figure out what the right thing to do is.
Hi, I'm back. Quick question. Yep. Will there be announcements on the mailing lists for starting, like, hey, we're going to start messing with URDF, come have...
Yeah, so like I said...
register your complaints here.
On one hand, we've been sort of bad about that, and we're going to try to be better about communicating when we start working on those things and involving people at the get-go. The other half of it is that those things both are less clear what should be done and are not necessarily in our critical path for the infrastructure. And it's not, necessarily in the critical path for other parts of the system. I mean, it is for some things, but, like we can work on, the launch system while we also talk about the robot description format, right? Whereas right now, like, services are dependent on how PubSub works, and both of those depend on how actions are implemented, right, and parameters. So we're sort of in this serialized state at the moment. So we had to, like, in order to even think about parameters, we had to get some other things down and in place. And so that's going to have to be a more retroactive look at what's there and discuss it and change it. But for the other stuff, like the robot description formats, I think that will start with just a general discussion. Because we neither have to have it nor is it clear what we should do about it. And that's going to involve more than just the ROS community. We have to bring in the Gazebo community and the Move It community and make sure that that's going to be a hell of a discussion.
Oh yeah, the Ignition Robotics community.
I think the discussion there that we had, I think there's a lot of different different ways to approach having multiple robots.
Yeah.
Lots of thoughts to be had there. So yeah. I figured out how to unmute myself just then, by the way.
Great. Nice to have
a lot of opinions.
Yeah.
I'd like to throw out a different idea, not directly about these messages and things, but it's definitely about build system. And to start with, what I'd like to say is that I really like what I've seen of Ament or however it's pronounced. I haven't quite figured that out yet, but it's good, and especially the auto stuff. And so it seems to me that not in the next 6 months for sure, but perhaps in the next time frame, that it would be great if we could modify ROS1 packages so they could be built by Ament Auto or Ament. And that doesn't break or destabilize ROS1 because everything that currently exists is build tool Catkin. So you'd have to modify the package to say build tool Ament Auto CMake or whatever it's called, and then you would be able to modify the CMake file, CMake lists, so that you could build the package the same. At least a lot of that infrastructure could work the same for ROS1 and ROS2 versions of that package. I think that's potentially a very valuable thing to do, and in no way destabilizing of ROS1.
Yeah, I agree. That's a really interesting idea, and that's sort of what we were going for with the Mint. Is we're trying to not because at the very core of the Mint tool is that really all you need to be able to do is tell us in Python code through a plugin what do you do for building, what do you do for installing, what do you do for testing, and you need to generate a shell script which has any environment you need to change if you need to do that, and you need to have a package XML so we know what order to build you in. And that's really the only requirements. And so in that perspective, it would seem that you could do Catkin and Ament. You could have Ament packages which find packages as a result of Catkin. You could have Catkin packages that could find packages as a result of Ament, because as far as Catkin is concerned, an Ament package is just a CMake package. So it could be possible that we could have that where you could start converting ROS1 packages to Ament, but that's definitely down the road. Maybe there's some roadblocks there, I don't know. But that would be great. I think that would be awesome if we could, sort of through attrition. Yeah, the thing we just don't want to do is is like what happened with Catkin and ROS build was that, you know, it was such a complicated relationship between the two that basically it forced everyone to switch to Catkin. Because, you know, if you had any dependencies which were ROS build and you wanted to use Catkin, you were encouraged to convert that package, that ROS build package to Catkin. So maybe it's not such a strict relationship between a Mint and Catkin, and something like that's possible. So.
But does that also imply that if a Mint build would build like Mint packages as well as Catkin packages, would it also imply that you can like mix them in a single workspace?
It wouldn't hurt. It doesn't necessarily imply it, but it'd be nice to have, I think.
So we would have to change the way that setup files work in Catkin, I think. That's the only technical roadblock I see. But it might be possible to do that as build flags to Catkin. So when an emit, basically you have to use the emit tool if you're mixing them, and then the emit tool tells the Catkin packages, hey, don't do these things that interfere with sharing a workspace with other people. But if it's possible to mix a CMake package and a Python package with a Catkin package in a workspace, it may be possible to do a Mint as well. I won't guarantee it's possible.
I do think it would be useful even if you cannot mix the packages in the same workspace. Even if that's a limitation, it would still be a useful thing to have, just to be able to maintain the source for both versions using the common tools.
Yeah, one problem that comes up with if you want to do it between ROS1 and ROS2 is that the dependencies in the package XML may change. And we don't have a solution for that yet, but maybe that's something to think about too. I don't know.
In terms of ROS2 building ROS1 packages, even just being able to build the message packages might be useful. Is to automatically convert ROS1 message packages to ROS2 message packages.
So the automatic conversion tool should be totally possible. So far, all of the changes we've made, except for removing the sequence number, but that doesn't affect the message packages directly, the definitions at least directly. Those are just find and replace, basically. So, you know, it should be a straightforward thing to convert one package to the other. Having it do it at build time or automatically or something like that, maybe that's possible. It's questionable whether that's a good idea. We'll have to see.
So I've worked with a lot of ROS newbies that buy Baxter and want to get the robot up and running and all of this. And so we have a lot of infrastructure that kind of abstracts ROS away, but not completely. I like the idea of having a uniform ROS tool, as you mentioned in one of the discussions, William, like ROS something. And I think building would be a valuable thing to have as part of this tool, maybe just an invocation of it. But having a unified name is a good user experience because you don't get the, oh, what's Catkin and how does this relate to ROS? How does that relate to my robot? Where, like, it's a lot to take in all at once. And so if you know you're starting with the core ROS something, that's enough to start diving through the documentation.
Yeah, and that's a good idea. And like I said, I think that's best served as layers. So if we have like a high-level ROS command that can build packages, then I think it would just call out to Mint tools, for example.
Right.
And, you know, we can only hide so much of that. You know, if there's a problem, then you start to have to understand what's going on under the hood. And there's a double-edged sword there. If you had so much magic, people can't figure out what's going on. And so there's a balance to be struck there between, like, obscuring details and making things transparent, and, you know, versus, you know, everybody has to do everything from scratch and just use plain CMake. So we're trying to strike that balance, and we've moved probably closer to the user experience side of that balance with a Mint, because, you know, in Catkin we really tried to use only the CMake commands and stuff like that. But with the Mint Auto, we have wrapped the create executable and create library to provide more functionality. So
yes,
I don't know. We're pushing back and forth on that line.
So something that I think was really good at creating a unified experience that Ken Connolly had put together forever ago was ROS. And, you know, I think, you know, hardly anyone knows about it. I think parts of it still work. I haven't used it in a long time, but, you know, for people who are trying to figure out what to do and how to fill out messages and how to call services, or even just, you know, as a general debugging interface, that was a great tool. I couldn't imagine using Orcos without the Orcos deployer console, which is essentially the same thing. And I think really, highlighting that, whether it's just something that gets resurrected over the course of the next little bit for ROS 1, or just is added as a bullet point to be focused on in ROS 2. I think having a single entry point for exploring ROS, like you were saying, would be really great for newbies, both for runtime system and also for even just building and configuring workspaces.
Yeah, just as a quick shout out, Dan Lazawatsky, also at WashU, has been keeping that alive, gave a ROSCon talk last year.
Yeah. I don't use it because I don't have a good reason why. I think I've used it on occasion, especially when I was in college, and it seemed really neat. I just have learned to use the command line tools, and it never occurs besides the point. No, I think it's a great idea. Like David pointed out, it's being maintained. It's not really promoted. You could argue it should be like, polished up some more and elevated in the tutorials or something like that. That might be a good idea to spend time on that. But for ROS 2, we have to get the technical pieces in place. ROS works because it has a bunch of stuff under the hood, Python libraries, and things to crawl the package path for it, things to find messages for it that just aren't in place yet in ROS 2. So again, like the conversion tool from catkin to emit, it's probably further down the road for us. Yeah, and you're right. So those are great tools that we can help with the technical side of it, maintenance, releasing, providing APIs where possible. But those are great examples where I think the community can be really helpful. Like Jonathan, you've been working with the catkin tools, and you made a lot of usability improvements I didn't have time to do, and that's great. And I think that a similar model is good for ROS. And of course, Dan maintains ROS. So a lot of times we're not the best people to know what is really easy to use and friendly, and maybe it translates better for people who are educating people constantly with it, or bringing up new people constantly with it. Probably have better ideas than we do. And we have limited resources where you can help. That's great.
I think we should have a community involvement ROS live session where we just talk about these sort of community management issues and stuff. I think that would be a really good long hour on just those sort of topics.
Yeah.
I understand it's not an easy question to answer, but would there be any interest in hiring a usability person for all this?
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not opposed to it. But we do have to pay the bills. We have to make sure that. So yeah, we've talked about having community managers and stuff like that. It's just about what we have the resources to do. So we as much as it seems like all we do is work on the technical stuff of ROS, we also work on a lot of other projects and stuff to help keep the lights on.
I promise you that a lot of the people here think that I'm not contributing as much to ROS 2 as I could be, but there's a lot of time I'm spending on things like maintaining the blog and emailing and making presentations.
And we've often thought of hiring someone to take that responsibility off our shoulders, but
those are really important things, though. That's what gets ROS out there and gets everybody seeing it and wanting to know more about it. It's not technical, but very important.
Yeah, that's a fair point. All I can say is I'll bring it up to Brian.
Someone who likes people.
But I would never turn down extra help, especially with things like community management and stuff. It's just a question of whether we can afford it.
But also take donations.
Nice one.
Okay. On that note, I think this has been a really really productive discussion. I think it'd be great if we could try to do one of these every month, focusing on a different topic. I think we came up with a lot of. Clearly, it's more to talk about the build system. I mean, clearly there are some other things that people really want to talk about some more right now. And I think if what's up?
Probably messages will be the next stuff.
What do you think, Jack?
I'd be in favor of getting that resolved as soon as possible.
So I think
I
we
was
can.
hoping to distract everybody.
So I think this has been really good. Does anyone else have anything to add? I'm probably gonna head out. I don't know if anyone else wants to keep talking or any sort of final comments from people.
I just want to say before we go away feeling like there's a million problems that I'm really pleased with a lot of the work that's been done on ROS 2, and I think you guys are doing a terrific job.
We appreciate that, Zach. Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to echo Jack's sentiments. As much as we give you a hard time about some of this stuff, I really appreciate the work you guys do. Dirk, William, I know you guys worked really hard on this.
Well, thanks. Good to hear it.
You know, there are parts that do frustrate us, so.
There's frustration everywhere. But we'll get through it.
I think it would be good, like, to follow up with, like, people which, like, when you bring up, like, the SO versioning things, we talked in ROS, like, a year and a half or something about. I think it would be good to just, like, the people who, like, have a strong interest in that to, like, start pushing on that on the mailing list and write, like, something which, like, what are the goals, what is a proposed way of doing it, what are the pros and cons, just coming up with, like, pushing that topic forward in order that it gets addressed, because I think things like these are, like, usually not the things we focus on right now, but we already know that we want that for ROS 1 for a long time, so we should really get that, like, integrated in ROS 2, like, as early as possible. And SO versioning is just, like, an example for that.
Yeah, I mean, we try to push issues that we think are important, but we don't have time to make sure discussions keep going, to follow up on every mailing list that goes, thread that goes silent. So if you see something that's important to you, please champion it, keep pushing it, bump it. That helps us a lot, because it just takes a lot of time for us to keep track of all the things that we've been talking about and to keep the discussions going. So as much as you guys can do that, help the momentum stay up. That's useful for us.
It would be great if there was a sort of better piece of infrastructure than the Google groups to maintain some of these things, because frankly, things just get lost in the noise. I mean, it's really hard to tell. People are, quote boxes and quotes, and it gets mangled, and then someone sends something from their phone and top posts. It would be great if there was any sort of little bit of infrastructure that OSRF could put into maintaining a better sort of discussion forum for ROS. I mean, even just install PHP BB or something like that.
Question.
Less about technical limitations only.
Well, I mean, I think it's always a question, like, does the technology help? And it's hard to say. I mean, I'm not opposed to trying new things if people have suggestions. The thing is that everybody knows how to use email. Yeah, maybe we should start a ROS subreddit. Yeah, maybe
There's a ROS subreddit.
Is there?
Yeah, it is.
Oh no.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe we can stick to the same portions of that website.
On our side, if at all possible, but if there's a hosted solution that might add some value, I'm open to trying it. The thing is, we just don't want to draw people in every direction. We already have lots of mailing lists trying to focus the discussions and keep from blasting people with stuff they don't care about, but we'd also have to fight in the other direction against bifurcating our communications so much that nobody can find anything.
For example, the SO topic which brought up, I think it was not like a technical thing that we at the end had technical limitations communicating with that. It was just like after a longer discussion like a year and a half ago, there was basically no consensus reached, and at that point the discussion just died out. And I don't think that technology might assist a little bit in the communication, but this kind of problem technology will not solve for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe it's something we can all sort of think about while we're trying to sort through the subsequent mailing lists. But yeah, so this has been really great. I'd like to say also thank you guys for continuing to be as open as your sort of resources enable you to be, and I look forward to more sort of community involvement in these sort of discussions.
Yeah, and I promise I'm looking at your pull requests.
What's that?
As I promise I'm working on the pull request.
You should be careful.
All right, well, nice to see you guys. I think I'm going to sign out now too.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right.
Broadcast. Have a good one.
Bye.